Okay, so I'm taking the position, and I'm going to imitate what I heard David Wood say, which I really thought was great. He said, the big question is, did Jesus resurrect? And then he said, the short answer is yes. The long answer is yes. Yes, he did. And let's go back and talk a little bit about this. So during Jesus' ministry, his half brothers, including James, tried to stop his ministry. They thought he'd gone mad, and his apostles didn't understand what he meant by rebuilding the temple, his body, after it had been destroyed after 3 days. But on the road to Emmaus, Jesus opened their eyes to the prophecies, and they realized there were actually 330 fulfilled prophecies in the Old Testament. And I can talk about that a little bit later today, because I have some very specific ones that you'll find really interesting, such as Psalm 22, Isaiah 53, Daniel 7, Daniel 9. Daniel 7, I'm just speaking to Mark 14:62, where Jesus said, yes, I am the Messiah, and you will see him coming in the clouds of heaven and sitting at the right hand of the mighty one. So we did have confirmation from Jesus that, yes, he is the Messiah. Now, during his crucifixion, Peter denied him, as predicted, 3 times. And Peter and the male apostles, except for John, were in hiding during his crucifixion because they wanted to avoid a similar death. And Saul, who is also called Paul, was busy persecuting Christians after Jesus' resurrection, and he stood at the feet of St. Stephen when Stephen was stoned. Now, there's an early creed from 1 Corinthians 15. It says, for what I received, I passed on to you as of first importance, that Christ died for our sins according to the scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the 3rd day according to the scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas and then to the 12. After that, he appeared to more than 500 of the brothers and sisters at the same time, most of whom are still living, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James, then to all the apostles, and last of all, he appeared to me also as one abnormally born. Now, this creed, it's been agreed upon. There's pretty much a scholarly consensus from people even like agnostic Bart Ehrman, who agree that this was within a few years of Jesus' resurrection. And so we have these minimal facts surrounding the resurrection. Jesus was crucified under Pontius Pilate. We've got historian Josephus verifying that. Women were first to discover his empty tomb, and no one claimed Jesus was buried anyplace else until about 1,700 years later. His dead body was never produced. All 4 Gospels attest to the fact that Jesus is risen. Paul, who once hunted and persecuted Christians, indicated he saw the risen Christ in the passage I just mentioned, along with 500. Early Christians, including Paul, Peter, Stephen, and James, were often beaten, jailed, stoned, hung on crosses, or beheaded, and examples can be found in Acts, the epistles, and in external writings by Polycarp, Pliny the Younger, and Tacitus. And I've got a big, long list of all of the extra biblical support we have present with me today in case we need to go into that. Christianity was not legalized until 313, when Constantine finally legalized it, and it started as a religion of peace, growing through peaceful efforts of apostles and disciples, and sporadically they were persecuted quite heavily under people such as Nero, Decian, and Diocletian. By 313, Christianity had between 5 and 6 million adherents. And then after it was legalized by Constantine around 350, there were around 50 million adherents, according to historians. So the theories to refute the resurrection are without merit. The swoon theory, where Jesus faked his death, has no ancient evidence. It fails to explain change in the apostles. The twin theory, that Jesus had a twin, has, again, no ancient evidence, and it also fails to explain the change in the apostles, meaning the apostles came out of hiding and were willing to preach for Jesus over decades, despite being burned, persecuted, skinned, crucified, and beheaded, and all sorts of other awful treatments. They were buried in a mass grave. We have zero ancient evidence supporting the assertion that that he was buried in a mass grave. 1 Corinthians 15 is an early creed that also points to the idea that he was risen. The disciples stole the body. Of course, there's no body, so that fails to explain the change in the apostles as well. The mass hallucination, like dreams, hallucinations are internal and they can't be shared. Plus, Jesus appeared to them in many modes where they could see, hear, touch, and be in his presence. The disciples conspired. Now, we have no support for that. People don't risk their lives for decades for a lie. They were uniquely positioned to know the truth, okay? They were positioned to know that. And also, if you say, well, miracles are impossible, you finally get to this point and you say miracles are impossible, yet we have tons of support for miracles even today. And I've got a few others besides the one right here with Barbara Comiskey-Snyder that I can mention today, where Barbara was bedridden with MS, and she heard the voice of Jesus say, "My child, get up and walk." Now, she was in a wheelchair. Her feet and body were atrophied, and immediately she was able to get up and walk. She had been in a wheelchair for around 7 or 8 years, and this miracle happened in the early 80s, and she's still without MS. So it's a miracle, and those sorts of things have been documented by people like Craig Keener and Lee Strobel and others. So I must ask you a few questions. This is what Jim would say. How is it possible that a cult inspired by the execution of an obscure criminal in a long vanquished empire came to exercise such a transformative and enduring influence on the world? Christianity is the most enduring and influential legacy of the ancient world, according to agnostic Tom Holland. How is it possible that a humble son of a carpenter, fisherman, a tax collector, a tent maker, and a few more were able to change the world? If a religion is true and God within the religion is benevolent, would we expect changes in a world after his son appeared, moving humanity closer to the standards of righteousness that he has set? Well, yes, we would expect that. And with Christianity, we actually have that. So let's go and look at this, what was said by Gamaliel and recorded in the book of Acts. But Gamaliel was a teacher of the law and a Sanhedrin. And he says, "Men of Israel, carefully consider what you intend to do to these men. Some time ago, Theudas appeared, claiming to be somebody, and about 400 men rallied to him. He was killed, all his followers dispersed, and it came to nothing. After him, Judas. Therefore, in the present case, I advise you, leave these men alone." See, they had captured Peter and other apostles. "Let them go, for if their purpose or activity is of human origin, it will fail. But if it is from God, you will not be able to stop these men. You will only find yourself fighting against God." So did Jesus change the world? In ancient times, the collective was exalted, and individuals were not valued unless they were wealthy, warriors, or male. Female babies were often left out to die of exposure. The Roman Colosseum was a scene where killing was cheered. People scorned the losers and the underdogs. The poor were considered cursed, while the wealthy were considered blessed, and few cared about or for the poor. Fueled by the example of Jesus, early Christians began helping the poor, rescuing babies left out in the streets to die, forgiving their trespassers, building schools and hospitals for all, ending ancient slavery, ending the brutality in the Colosseum, and elevating the importance and value of all as individuals. Genesis said we are all made in God's image. This is completely unique to Judeo-Christianity. There is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, nor is there male and female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. This is amazing. This idea of equality came out of Christianity. You wouldn't find that coming out of something like biology, because we, of course, have proportional gifts. But the idea that all men are created equally, and we hold these truths to be self-evident here in the United States and in other places, is something that's spurned from Christianity, even as evidenced in Tom Holland's book, The Dominion. The moral values of truth, love, selflessness, humility, equity, equality, life, and liberty have also sprung from Christianity. They were present in the world before, however, we're discovering the importance of these following the appearance of Jesus. We all share this moral duty no matter where we are on the planet. All 7 major world religions and atheism and humanism have supported this idea that we should follow the golden rule and do what's right for others. The U.S. is the most individualist society today, and our values were founded on Christian values of industriousness, truth, equality, liberty, fairness, and life. The Western world exalts the same values as evidenced by the UN International Bill of Human Rights, and these values have spread throughout the world. Did Jesus do the impossible? He went against people's expectations. Rather than appear with power, majesty, and glory, he appeared in a manger. Rather than work as an earthly king, Jesus worked as a humble carpenter. Rather than rub elbows with the Pharisees, who were considered the most devout followers of God, Jesus rubbed elbows with the sinners. Rather than call on his followers to do great works, he has called on us to have faith in him. No other religions are like Christianity, where salvation is based on faith and grace and not works. So in summary, we have a consensus agreement on several minimal facts surrounding Jesus' resurrection, for which the best explanation is Jesus resurrected. Theories to refute these have never answered all of the facts we have. So for Jim to refute these, he needs to address each of the facts that I cited, but most particularly the basics. So Jesus was crucified under Pontius Pilate. His apostles were initially in hiding, and they came out and preached for him for decades, despite major persecutions. And they also said that Jesus is risen, and we have extra biblical support for this idea that the apostles did make those claims. From extremely humble roots, Jesus transformed the world. No other religion has had such a positive impact as humanity moves closer and closer to the discovery of the objective moral standards he has set. Thank you.
it still? Oh, is your audio still out? Okay, give me one second. I'm going to share my screen. If I can find the button. Little button, where are you? Okay. Let's share that. And full screen that one. Okay. Okay, so let's see. Let me turn this. Oh, well, where'd it go? Okay, here we go. Oh, yeah, it's not very loud. This is Benny Hinn, and this is Benny Hinn's magical jacket. As you can see, he's just swinging it, knocking these people down. So you have to ask yourself: are these people crazy? Are they lunatics? Are they just lying? Are they making all of this up? Can everybody be making this up? Or can it be the Lord? I would ask SJ what she would think it is. Boom! There he goes again. Look at that. That's some powerful stuff right there, guys. Okay, let's see what we got next in here. Oh, we got some more knocking down. Okay. All right, SJ uses the minimal facts all the time to try and prove that the resurrection is historical. Yet, it's not what convinced her. The minimal facts argument wasn't convincing to her. As a matter of fact, it took Jesus making himself obvious to her for her to believe that it's true. So I would ask her that then why do we need the minimal facts? If you couldn't reach Christ without or with these minimal facts, then what makes you think that somebody else can? And well, let's look at these minimal facts. First of all, I would like to note that these minimal facts are not minimal facts. Just short and sweet. Let me find it. Where'd it go? Okay. I can't find the screenshot that I just took. Oh, there it is. Okay. Number one, Jesus was crucified under Pontius Pilate. We can see Josephus for that. Okay. So Jesus died. What is that? Well, where's the resurrection in that? The resurrection is not anywhere in that. Women first discovering his empty tomb. Okay. There's no resurrection in that. There's no evidence of resurrection. What this is evidence of women discovering a tomb, or the claim of women discovering a tomb. All four Gospels attest to the fact that Jesus is risen. Yes. And again, what does that have to do with the actual resurrection itself? We're talking about attestations. Now, if we want to talk about attestations and about how convincing they can be, can you hear this?
Barely.
Believe their message.
Okay, let me go back. All right, so this is Gary Habermas. And for those who can't hear,
martyrdom does not prove a message.
Martyrdom does not prove a message.
Martyrdom proves that the witnesses.
Martyrdom proves that the witnesses believe this. That's all martyrdom does.
Buddhist priests who set themselves on fire to protest the war in Vietnam.
Buddhist priests setting themselves on fire to protest.
Deny the fact that they were utterly appalled at the war.
You can't deny the fact that they were appalled.
So they died for an ethical reason. When the earliest disciples died for their message, it doesn't prove their message.
When the earliest disciples died for their message, this does not prove their message. This is Gary Habermas speaking.
But you're right. They put themselves in a position to say, I've satisfied myself.
They put themselves in a position to say, I've satisfied myself.
There's enough data here. Now you say, well, do we have evidence?
Do we have evidence
for their martyrdom? That we know that all the early apostles died as martyrs. I would not say
that
we know that all
the early apostles died as martyrs. Okay, so you heard it from the man himself. Now we've got Josephus, we've got Tacitus, we've got Suetonius. These are the reason that SJ likes to name Paul and James and Peter and Stephen, is because these are the only people who can be who can have anything linked to them within the first century. Everybody else is second century, third century, and above and beyond. But freaking Buzz Lightyear. So we've got Tacitus. Tacitus was born in 56. Tacitus was born 20 years after Jesus died. 20-something years after Jesus died. Josephus died a few years. Josephus was born a few years after Jesus died. Suetonius was born 30 years after Jesus died. And these are the earliest historians. We've got two Roman historians, Tacitus and Suetonius, and we've got a Jewish historian, Josephus. Now, they all have something else in common, something else that's all recorded, and I'll give you a hint. He healed the lame, and he made the blind see. Anybody? No, it's not Jesus. No, it really isn't Jesus. This is Vespasian. Now, Vespasian was born in 9 CE, and he died in 79. So before he died, all these historians were at least 10 years old. The other ones were in their 20s and 30s. It would be Tacitus and Suetonius, respectively. So they would at least be able to be an eyewitness, and their accounts would be far more miraculous than the accounts of Jesus if we have multiple attestations. So what the heck? Sorry. Okay, let's see. Where's my... Okay, Josephus. This is Josephus's account of Vespasian. He says, "You are to be Caesar, O Vespasian." This is a prophecy. He's actually prophesying. He says, "And emperor, you and this your son, bind me now still more securely and keep me for yourself. For thou, O Caesar, art not only Lord over me, but over the land and the sea and all the human race. And certainly I deserve to be punished by closer custody than now if I fabricate anything concerning God." Again, this is Josephus. Okay. Now we got Tacitus in Histories 481. It says, "One of the common people of Alexandria, somebody who was well known for his blindness, came in and he threw himself at Vespasian's knees, and he says, just begging him, groaning, just heal me, please." And he was doing this because he was being advised by the god Serapis, who was at the time it was the most popular god being served. Believe it or not, it wasn't Jesus or Yahweh, and whom this nation devoted as it is to many superstitions. Worships more than any other divinity. Okay, he begged Vespasian that he would deign to moisten his cheek and eyeballs with his spittle. So he's just begging him, just please, just spit on me. Just give me some spit on my cheek and give me some spit on my eyeballs. And another person came in with a diseased hand at the council from the same god. He was praying that either his limb fall off or it be fixed. And so Vespasian, he figured that he was having some good enough luck lately that nothing could go wrong, and that everything's going right, with the prophecy of Josephus being fulfilled and all, which, sorry, I don't mean to kill the ending. So he does what he can, and he accomplishes what is required. The hand was instantly restored to its use, and the light of day again shone upon the blind. And these persons actually present multiple attestations, both of them facts, even now when nothing is to be gained by falsehood. That is what Tacitus said. So Tacitus is confirming just essentially what Paul does. This is the truth, and what Moses does. This is the truth because I wrote it, so we can trust him, right? Because it's in Tacitus, it's in Josephus. If only it was in Suetonius, right? Well, guess what? It isn't Suetonius, and he says the exact same thing, not even verbatim. So he's not just doing it verbatim. It's actually a lot more extensive. I just didn't want to put it all on here and read it. But he adds a little caveat at the end. He says, "They who were present relate both these cures, even at this time when there is nothing to be gained by living." So, by lying. So there's nothing that they can gain by lying now, right? Nothing that anybody can gain, but yet everybody who was present says, yes, both of these things happened. And this is what a historian says, a contemporary historian, more contemporary than Jesus. Now think about that. These men were alive during the time of Vespasian. They didn't know Jesus. They never met Jesus. They didn't meet the resurrected Jesus. They heard stories from people who had stories and stories from stories. But so I find that to be hilarious. And I wanted to touch on one other thing, since we're talking about reliability. Why did the women bring spices to the tomb? In Mark, it says that Mary went too far. It says that Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Joseph, were looking on to see where he was laid. So they watched Josephus. I didn't mean to sort of type Joseph. They watched Josephus wrap him in a linen cloth, right? They watched him. Quit moving. So by linen cloth, he laid it down. They saw him wrap him, and they saw him put him in the tomb. But it says that they bought spices so that they might come and anoint him. Okay? Luke 23:56 through 24:1 talks about the women again. They saw where the body was laid. Then they returned with the prepared spices and perfumes. They returned and prepared spices and perfumes. And on the Sabbath, they rested according to the commandment. But on the first day of the week, they came to the tomb to bring the spices. So we're talking days later. So it agrees with Mark in that the women witnessed Joseph laying the linen and wrapped Jesus in the tomb. But in Luke, the women don't wait until the day after the Sabbath to buy spices. And instead, they return to prepare the spices and ointment that day, and then they rest on the Sabbath to return the day after. But this passage also suggests that the women were going to the tomb the day after the Sabbath for the purpose of preparing the body with spices, which is a ritual that was done before burial, no sooner than 3 hours before burial, because it was done not only to purify the body, but to act as a perfume to cover the smell of decomposition in the hours leading up to the burial, so the family didn't have to smell all of that. But Jesus was already buried. He didn't have a funeral. He didn't require purification. He was Jesus. And there was no reason to mask the smell of decomposition, as he was already in the tomb, which was the whole point, is getting him there smell-free. That would be like burying a loved one on one day and then returning days later for the body, digging it up so you can embalm it. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense, does it? Now, we got one more account to read, and that's the account in John. And this is where we see Nicodemus. It says, Nicodemus, who had first come to him by night, also came, bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, about 100 pounds weight. So they took the body of Jesus and they bound it in linen, wrapping it with the spices, as is the burial customs of the Jews. So who's going to do this? If the women witnessed this happen, let's just say that Mark, Matthew, and Luke all forgot to write about this. They all forgot. Oh, we forgot to write about the spices, guys. Sorry. But John doesn't. John doesn't write about the spices, but it doesn't matter because the women would know. The women would see 100 freaking pounds of myrrh and aloe. So I don't find that to be historical. It's chronological errors, and there's all other kinds of, I mean, if you can't see the error in this, then you have a severe bias. And there's a problem. I knew that SJ was going to use this specific one, because about this time last year, actually it's been over a year now, back in January of 19, SJ came on to onto a debate or a discussion with Paul Gio, and they had a talk about what was justified in being said here, and what is embellishing, what is going too far, what is inflating it, basically giving it more than it's worth. And they went through it, and SJ had agreed to amend it, to change it. But this one's so much more convincing because it adds in things that you just have to concede. So let's, like, Jesus was crucified under Pontius Pilate, therefore resurrection? Well, women discovered the tomb, therefore resurrection? All four Gospels attest to the fact that he is risen, therefore resurrection? Paul, along with the 500, whoever they are, we have no clue who they are because the Gospels don't mention the 500. Paul's the first one to mention them, including the 12 apostles, which there weren't 12 that he could appear to because there were only 11 because Judas had killed himself and Matthias had not yet been appointed until after the ascension. And then you have the early Christians, including Paul, Peter, Stephen, and James, who were beaten, jailed, and stoned, and hung on crosses. Well, yeah, but guess what? They knew who Jesus was. Jesus told us so many times. He's the living bread that came down out of heaven. If anyone eats of this bread, you'll live forever, blah, blah, blah. The living Father sent me. I live because of the Father. So he who eats me, blah, 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 eat me, blah, blah, blah. And then in John, Peter answered him and said, Lord, to whom shall we go? You have words of eternal life. 69, giggity. I didn't mean to leave that in there. We have believed and have come to know that you are the Holy One of God. This is before he dies, before he's supposedly resurrected. There is no mystery. John knows exactly who he is. Peter knows who he is. Everybody freaking knows that he's the Holy One of God. And with that, I surrender the rest of my time.
All right. Thanks so much for that, Jim. I believe my mic is now working, so we should be good to go there. Hang on one second. Let me unshare Jim. There we go. All right, perfect. All right, let me know. I've seen Tog and Brother John and Sarah and a bunch of people in the chat. Let me know if my mic is now at 100 percentile, whether Jew or Gentile. All right. So it does look like it's working, and we'll kick it over to SJ to start off our open discussion. If you have any questions, make sure and at me at Converse Contender.
So I want to thank Jim for doing his homework and looking up my last debates and going through my stuff. And I really appreciate that, Jim, because yes, you knew I was going to use the minimal facts, and I really can't resist. But I did notice that you weren't able to look at all of the minimal facts and give me a best explanation for them. I noticed that you went through them individually and tried to refute them individually. But you have to take those as a whole, even if you just take a couple of them, and explain the big question of why the apostles did what they did over a few decades, when we have attestation within and outside of the Bible that yes, they said that they saw the risen Christ, and they were uniquely positioned to know whether or not what they were saying was true. But I want to also point to something that you said. Yes, the idea of the minimal facts being convincing to me and bringing me to Christianity, as I mentioned and you confirmed, Jesus is what brought me to Christianity in 2012. He started becoming very obvious in my life, where I started noticing. I could say he's probably been obvious all along, but I just started noticing in 2012. I started having spiritual experiences, and I had not even investigated the Christianity at that point. I had never even heard of the minimal facts. It wasn't that I wasn't thinking that they were not convincing. I'd honestly never heard of them. I learned about that when I interviewed Gary Habermas on my channel not too long ago. So
was that experience the reason that you believe in the resurrection, or was it looking at these minimal facts?
I believe in the resurrection because of I would say a cumulative case, but I believe in Jesus because he made himself obvious to me.
Okay, and you're right. I didn't get to go through all of them just because I didn't have time. But the point that I was making is that some of these they seem really misleading and really dishonest, and they really kind of pose themselves as something they're not. Like number 6, Christianity was not legalized until 313. No religion was quote unquote legalized. Now it had its they had some legal status taken away for a period of 10 years, but that's it. The same has happened to the Jews. In fact, the Jews have gone through a hell of a lot worse. In fact, if you read Josephus's writings, whenever Vespasian brought back all those Jews, who do you think built the Colosseum? It wasn't Christian slaves, it was Jewish slaves.
So let me ask you this, and you brought up Vespasian a few times. Where are the people called who are following Vespasianity?
Does that matter?
I mean, there are no, just like actually, just
that has nothing to do with the historicity.
Just like Gamaliel pointed out, if the faith is phony, it would diminish. And nobody's heard of. I mean, who's heard of Vespasian besides a few, maybe a few scholars? We don't have a Vespasianity. We do have Christianity, and Christianity is that actually. You're pointing out to Vespasian actually supports my entire claim on what's changed the world due to Jesus, because we don't have Vespasianity.
Which sect of Christianity? Because it fell apart. Christianity fell apart really quick. In fact, we know very early on during the Pauline epistles that Paul's going around having to fix up churches because of Gnostic influence, because of other influence from whether they're esoteric Jews or whatever. Christianity was not a set religion early on. Christianity did not come about as a set religion for another at least 200 years.
Well, we didn't have legal protections early on. So yes, Christianity, I might have
Nobody
said,
had legal protections.
Well, we didn't have legal protections, but the idea, Jim, though, and you said that there were only a few people who were mentioning this. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again, because you said there were only a few people who were mentioning the martyrdoms, and I wanted to go into that. And I also wanted to go into what you just pointed out.
First century.
Actually, you've missed a couple of those still. So I want to also talk about, I'm also going to talk about the fact of the Jewish people being persecuted. You are completely right about that. In fact,
you talking about Clement?
No, like Pliny the Younger, for example.
And what does Pliny say about it?
Pliny was born in 61. Pliny talks of Christian people being persecuted.
Okay, does he name anybody? Does he have a time or a place?
But the idea, well, we have.
He doesn't.
Okay, here, let me just bring up a slide here. Hold on one second.
And what do you think about the fact that Tacitus, Josephus, Suetonius, Cassius Dio, they all talk about these miracles and the divinity, and that Vespasian is in fact the Messiah?
Well, where is it now? I mean, my answer is, if it was true, just like Gamaliel said, we would still be following Vespasian today. But
you find these extra biblical sources to be convincing for your position. Yet we have two Roman historians here, Tacitus and Suetonius, who say, yeah, he was the Jewish Messiah. I mean.
So here's what we know. So we have two people who said he was a Jewish Messiah. Clearly he wasn't, because we don't even have him written into the Talmud, I would imagine. Or if he is written into the Talmud, it's very
actually
little.
He is.
He's written in the Talmud. Well, it's okay. So I was wrong about that. But that's here's what we have. So we have outside sources confirming a number of different facts about Jesus' life, which I have up here on the screen. We also have other people who've mentioned Jesus. The beheading by Nero is documented by Origen, Tertullian, Dionysius of Corinth. The martyrdom of Jesus' half-brother James was documented by Josephus.
What is the earliest, though?
And Clement of Alexandria. Peter was.
What is the earliest mention? Was the earliest mention of the martyrdom of Paul?
I've got that coming. Just give me a sec, Jim. So Peter was crucified upside down is confirmed by Eusebius, the first church historian, in his book Ecclesiastical History, and also Dionysius of Corinth, Tertullian, and Origen.
Yes, and how long are they? Were they born when this happened? Were they alive? Were their grandparents alive when this happened?
I actually have that. So here's Josephus. He was born in 37. He also recounted, for example, James, Jesus' half brother. We also have Tacitus, as you mentioned, and he pointed out to the fact that Christians suffered the extreme penalty, or Christus suffered the extreme penalty, and Christians were suffering under Nero. Tacitus basically said that Christians were mocked. They were covered with the skins of beasts, torn by dogs, and perished, nailed to crosses. Yep. He cared about accuracy. We've got a lot of...
Well, he also talks about the Jews' persecution. Have you read anything about the Jews' persecution, or have you read anything about the persecution of the Roman pagans, or of the Greco-Roman pagans?
But the Greco-Roman pagans and the Jews weren't saying that they had a Messiah in Jesus. So today we're talking about the resurrection of Jesus. So I'm just providing support for Christianity. So.
Right, but we're talking about persecution, still just the same. People are still getting martyred.
Right.
And yet you think that because they're Christians, then suddenly that means that their leader is correct.
Well, the people were getting martyred because they were saying that Jesus was the risen Christ. And the fact is that they could renounce Jesus, and some of them did, not the apostles, but there were some people over the centuries who renounced Jesus. And we can see that documented even by Pliny the Younger. For I had no doubt that we have Christians, those who confessed, right. I interrogated a second and third time, threatening them with punishment. Mm-hmm. Those who persisted, so some still persisted that they were going to believe Jesus, he ordered executed. Right. We have support from Trajan, also with this Pliny interaction. We have Thales talking about the earthquake. That's a little going off here. We also have Marabar Serapion talking about Jesus being executed. Lucian, I know this is in the 2nd century, but we have also support for Jesus' execution. We have Celsus supporting the idea that Jesus proclaimed to be God and he had some miraculous powers. We have Suetonius, as you mentioned, noticing the punishments on Christians.
Okay, but let's look at the earliest ones. Tacitus. What does Tacitus say about the resurrection?
Well, Jim, that's an argument from silence.
I'm asking. Does any historian mention the resurrection or the saints coming out of their graves?
So we have what you're doing is actually a classic example of the argument from silence, because you would assume that Christians who had discovered the resurrection and acknowledged the resurrection, or people who had discovered that, would become Christians. So the fact that they just happen to be Christians, people like Origen and others, doesn't, and the fact that people are non-Christians who are not talking about the resurrection, we would expect that, because had they supported or bought into this idea of a resurrection, they likely would have become Christians, and then you would say that now that they're Christians, that we should discard everything that they've said to us.
Well, then maybe Jesus should have appeared to somebody who was not a believer in him already.
Well, he did, Paul.
Oh no, that was a bright light. The account of Paul's encounter with Jesus, and any of them in the New Testament, any of them in the risen Jesus's post-mortem encounters, completely different. There is no just a blinding light and just a disembodied voice that nobody else can see or hear. It's not like that in the New Testament. It's very clear that Paul did not have the same kind of experience that the apostles did, and Paul's the first one to mention the 500. Who are the 500? Why don't we have accounts from the 500?
So we have enough within the 500. He mentioned the apostles. He mentioned that he specifically mentioned Peter. He appeared to
the apostles aren't part of the 500.
Well, that's the thing is, Jim, because we don't have the names of the 500, what we do have that Paul did specifically.
I don't want 500. I just want one.
Yeah, well, what we do have in that verse, Jim, is we have Paul saying that he appeared to specific people, and the particular people he named were deniers, like Peter had denied Jesus and he was in hiding. We have his half-brother who basically went out and tried to stop his ministry. Paul pointed out that Jesus appeared to these people who were skeptical and denying his Christianity or his divinity. And then
they knew who he was. They've seen him do miracles. They've seen him raise Lazarus, raise sick children.
Paul said himself that Jesus appeared to him in 1 Corinthians 15, and it's also documented by Luke in the book of Acts.
And how does he describe it?
That Jesus appeared to Paul.
And how does he describe it? Does he walk with him? Can he see the holes in his hands?
Well, we know that the apostles attested to that when Jesus appeared.
The apostles did. I'm talking about Paul.
Paul didn't mention that, but if he did see that, just
but
because
Paul
he
did mention a blinding light and a voice that he could not see anybody.
That's because he had been blinded around the time when this all happened, and then when his scales came off a few days later, miraculously, that's when he went out and fasted and preached for Jesus.
And that sounds like something that'd be really, really, it's really familiar to people who would have known the Old Testament, somebody who would have been of the Pharisee mindset, right? But is there anything in the New Testament about that kind of encounter with Jesus, a blinding light? Anything?
It's the fact is, though, that Jim, is Paul is making a lot of attestations all throughout his epistles that Jesus appeared to these people and Jesus appeared to him. Now, he didn't say, he actually said
in claims
form in 1 Corinthians. So he
these are claims. You know, I can go online right now and I can show you that Washington State has had over 30,000 Bigfoot sightings since 1970. And you know what? Just the other day, a group of people witnessed Bigfoot, and they didn't wait 20 years to report it. They reported it immediately. And we have so many multiple attestations, and we have multiple attestations here of Vespasian performing miracles. We have Suetonius saying that it was true, that we have other people who witnessed it, and they say that it's true. So how is that any different than your 500?
Well, let's go back to, I think what you were kind of getting a little bit here is you were talking about the reliability of the Bible, essentially. I feel like you're saying blinding light, but then you're doubting that saw Jesus.
Not really. What I'm talking about is the favoritism. You putting more authority in the Bible, and therefore it takes precedence immediately. Like I felt like you haven't even considered Vespasian's miracles being real.
Well, I don't think many of the world is, and that probably tells us that it's not divinely inspired.
How do you determine that Vespasian's miracles were?
Wouldn't we assume that if it were divinely inspired, that more people would even have heard of Vespasian? It's kind of, there's nothing that's called Vespasianity. I think it's kind of silly.
So many people have heard of Vespasian. What do you mean?
How many people in the world have heard of Jesus today? I mean, I would say the vast majority in the world, if not 99% of people, have heard of Jesus.
I learned about Vespasian in like 9th grade.
So, well, let me talk about when we talk about whether or not the claims of Christianity are accurate. Somebody might say, well, let's go to what the agnostic people say. Like, what does Bart Ehrman say about Christianity and whether?
No, not the agnostic. We go to the biblical scholars.
Okay, well, Bart Ehrman's one of the biblical scholars, and here's what he said, and I think I've got this up on the screen so you guys can see it. He said, Bruce Metzger is one of the great scholars of modern times, and I dedicated the book to him because he was both my inspiration for going into textual criticism and the person who trained me in the field. And even though we may disagree on important religious questions, he is a firmly committed Christian, and I am not. We are in complete agreement on a number of very important historical and textual questions. If he and I were to be put in a room and asked to hammer out a consensus statement on what we think the original text of the New Testament probably looked like, there would be very few points of disagreement, maybe 1 or 2 dozen places out of many thousands. The position I argue for in misquoting Jesus does not actually stand at odds with Professor Metzger's position that the essential Christian beliefs are not affected by textual variants in the manuscript tradition of the New Testament.
The essential Christian belief.
The belief in the resurrection, that is the essential Christian belief. And that
is saying that the belief is not affected. It's not saying that belief is true. It's talking about the manuscript tradition. So talking about the textual variants, it's saying that these core tenets aren't part of the variants, but it will be some things like the long ending of Mark, things like the Johannine comma, things like the pericope adulterae, things of that nature that aren't in the oldest manuscripts, but still don't affect the core doctrine.
Yeah, the bottom line is the core doctrine of Jesus' resurrection is unaffected, and in the originals, according to Bart Ehrman.
And what did Gary Habermas say? Gary Habermas said that belief does not make it true.
Well, because Gary Habermas is bringing up a very logical point. And thank you for bringing that up and reminding me of that. What Gary Habermas did that's pretty important if you think about, he's just saying that today's martyrs, for example, if people talk about the martyrs, a lot of time they try to compare today's martyrs to the early martyrs in Christianity. And they might say, okay, well, the Muslims decided that they were going to fly into the world.
Did you not hear Habermas? That's exactly what he did.
So, well, that's the point. Because the Muslims decided to fly into the World Trade Center doesn't mean that Allah is true, because the Muslims believe that Allah is true. The difference is the early Christians actually saw the risen Jesus. No one has seen Allah. And so when you try to compare today's modern martyrs who only have a belief system, not necessarily a sighting, the early martyrs actually had a sighting.
Actually, there were several sightings. People saw Muhammad mount Baruch and ride up to the moon and cleave it in half. People witnessed this, and they died for these beliefs.
Well, I think we have enough. I mean, I don't have enough information on the Muslim faith to discount it, with the exception of one thing. The big exception of the Muslim faith that I think is discounting it is the fact that they denied that Jesus, Muhammad made it really unclear as far as whether or not Jesus was resurrected, because he claimed that God took Jesus to heaven prior to the resurrection. And for that reason alone, and the support that we have even in ancient Roman, Greek, Jewish, and all sorts of other places to Jesus' resurrection, to the crucifixion, and to the belief that the apostles claimed the resurrection, I think that alone tells us that the Muslim faith is off. I mean, it's written 600 years after Jesus' resurrection, and essentially he just denied that Jesus was even crucified. And
it's almost 2,000 years after Jesus' death, and he has not returned in this generation. It's time for the generation to be over, SJ. There is no generation. Jesus was everybody who listened to Jesus speak. Everybody who was at the Sermon on the Mount. They all expected Jesus to be back within one of their lifetimes. As a matter of fact, the 500, that is a literary device that they put in there in order for them to say, hey, there are these other people, but lucky for them, none of those 500 could ever refute it, because nobody knows who the 500 are, and you can't claim to be one of the 500 and then claim to be offended. So they said some of them who are still alive, that's holding on to that hope. It's like, crap, it's getting to the end of the first century. Jesus hasn't returned. All these people are getting old. We have to figure something out.
Okay, well, let me back up with what you just said. So you just mentioned something really important. And the fact is that Paul, when he was preaching 1 Corinthians, when he was writing 1 Corinthians, he pointed out that, yes, some people were alive and some were dead. And one of the great things about that is that verifies the validity of what he was saying, because he could have had people discounting what he was saying.
Who would discount it?
Wait. Also, I want to mention the other thing that you just mentioned as far as...
but actually, you don't understand what you're saying. Who would discount that?
Well,
nobody could.
Why wouldn't they if they didn't believe? If they were skeptics back then, and they would say, wait a second, we're calling on you this. We don't believe this kind of stuff. If we would have heard that, we didn't hear anything like that. Instead, what we're hearing is that Paul had people around him who were around at the time when Jesus resurrected and who are also witnesses. And if he didn't have 500 witnesses, somebody could have said, hey, there weren't 500 witnesses, you're lying.
Nobody knows, SJ. Nobody knows who these 500 are. None of them knew.
So how
are they going to go out and ask them if they don't know?
Because Paul had people around who were alive to testify against him if he were lying about 500. He had people.
SJ, who would testify against him?
It could have been a lot of people. There could have been people
who would testify against him and say, I didn't see him appear before 500 people. There could be a million people who said he didn't appear before 500 people because they weren't there. If you weren't there, then you can't report on it.
Jim, you could have had Josephus or Tacitus or any other hostile witnesses to Christianity.
Well, no, you couldn't, because nobody knows the historicity of the 500. Who are the 500? That's a really all around number.
It really doesn't matter who the 500 are.
Yes, it absolutely does. It matters just as much as Paul saying who Jesus appeared to first and never mentioning Mary.
Okay, I want to get to your generation issue too, because you mentioned the generation. And it's really important that people know that the word. You are right in some ways. Definitely, it's evident in the Bible that the apostles did think that Jesus would be coming back in the same generation, in their generation. But the word that was used in the text is genea, which refers to a generation or an era. We could still be in that same generation if you think about it that way. So we could still be, 2,000 years later in the same generation as they were. So
how?
If you refer to us as an era, well, it's the Christian. It's basically, and that reminds me. Actually, you just reminded me of something really good. So that reminds me of.
What is an era? Because there's nothing in the Bible that says that a period of religion is a generation.
So the word genea, though, could refer to an era. An era could
It can refer to an era, but by era, it means a period of time. It's a set period of time. But there is no set period of time. So in other words, if Jesus said something like something cryptic with numbers and some sort of, something along those lines, then maybe we could say that an era means this. But when he's using in his context, this generation shall not pass, he means these people living today, like your children, will be here. Your children will witness this. But the people who are standing here, some of you may not die until I return. That is a generation. There are so many reasons to suggest that a generation means the generation living, that I don't see how you can feel at all justified in saying that oh, well, he's generation. It doesn't mean that. It just means like the Christian era. It just means 2,000. It's 2,000 years. So it's fine. Because, people have been saying it's been 500 years. It's been fine. It's 600 years. It's been fine. 700 years. It's been fine. 1,100 years. 1,400 years. It's all been fine. And it's still fine. When is it not fine?
So I just want to point out what was the Jewish people believed. And okay, so there were 3 periods of time that the Jewish people referenced. And in the early, they referenced a period of 200, actually it was 3 periods of 2,000 years. So there was the early 2,000 years, there was a second 2,000 years after which Jesus was supposed to come, and there was their Savior was supposed to come. And then there was a third period of 2,000 years. And I think this is I don't have the exact, I got to double check where this is, but I believe it's in Sanhedrin 98a, but I got to double check that.
They believed that the earth was formed 4,000 years before then, and they knew that they had about 2,000 years left.
Well, that's one of the things is they were wondering in the first century, they were wondering why their Savior had not come, because they realized that this was the end of a 2,000-year period. Well, right now we're in the middle of another 2,000-year period after the Messiah came. And what's really neat about this is
that's 8. And never has 8,000 been the belief.
No, it's actually 6,000.
No, it's not.
No, that's the belief is in from 6,000.
That's the end of it.
So no, we're in the last set of 2,000 years, essentially, according to the early writings.
But the 2,000 years is supposed to be the kingdom on earth. And that has not happened yet. Jesus has not returned. So there's a huge gap here. So are you saying that it's 3 sets of 2 or sorry, two sets and then a big gap and then another set of 2?
So I'm saying that there was no gap. So it's 2 sets. I'm trying to find the exact quote here, and I can't believe I can't find it in my slides because I could have sworn I put it in here.
Well, while you're looking for that, I just want to mention that we're going to go for about another 5 minutes or so, and then we're going to hop into the Q&A. So if you have any questions, just tag me at Converse Contender, and we'll get into that here in just about 5 minutes or so.
Yeah. We can actually go ahead and go. I have to be somewhere at 2.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that we were going that long. Sorry.
All right, no problem. All right, so we'll jump straight in. Looks like we'll start with a super chat here. 1 sec while I pull this up. And sorry about all the audio issues. I'm not sure. You buy a brand new gaming laptop and you assume that you'll know how to work it, but that's not always the case. So first up, a super chat from former lead singer of Nickelback, Steven Steen, for $2.
What a douche.
I love that one. All right, so Jim Major's mustache converted to Christianity.
Yes, it did, and then it took over.
It's a fact. So Secondly, we have a super chat from Florida Man. Thank you so much for your super chat, Florida Man. I have 7 books providing. I'm sorry, I don't have my reading glasses. I have 7 books proving Harry Potter. Is he real? I guess that one's for SJ.
No, he's not. He's fictional.
Because it's not Jesus.
The genre of the Harry Potter books is fiction, and it's different than the genre of the Bible.
But if it was Jesus instead of Harry Potter, it'd be divine revelation.
So you say.
All right. So next we have a $5 super chat from Stupid Horde Energy. Thank you so much, Sarah, for your super chat. It says, why did Paul send the slave Onesimus back to his master? I'm guessing that was for SJ as well. Why did Paul send the slave Onesimus back to his master? I believe she's referring to the Philemon letter.
Yeah. I'm not actually sure why Paul sent Onesimus back. I do know that he did want Onesimus to be treated as a brother, and that actually was pretty great because that spoke to the kind treatment that Jesus advocated for slaves.
Okay, we'll move on. I think Onesimus was either on the road with was either a slave. A prisoner, or was in some other bad circumstances. But
it was essentially as a way to fix things with the Colossian church. It was like basically a gift. That's what it was.
We'll move on to Stolen Earth. It says, for SJ, as soon as it became legal, is when Christians started their campaign of convert by force or die, recorded accounts by the people who were victimized.
Yes, and never did they trash the house churches and break all of the little ritual places and the altars and things like that. That's just not something that they did. They respected each other's religion, but that's exactly what happened when Christians when they started persecuting the Greco-Roman pagans. They destroyed their altars, their temples. It was awful.
So we definitely have examples of bad actors in Christianity over the centuries, and so you're pointing to some of the things that happened in the medieval times and around then, and we definitely had the Crusades. We've got a lot of
not medieval. It's actually before Jesus.
So we have examples of bad actors during that time, certainly, and we have examples of that in just about every faith. And of course, no Christian today is saying, at least any Christian that I've heard of worth their salt, is not saying that, what they did was right. Let's go trash temples of other faiths and things like that. That's absolutely wrong, so we would condemn them. But my main point was talking about the first few hundred years of Christianity, where the Christians were the ones being persecuted and where they had no power, no glory, no material reasons to follow.
All right, thanks. Do you want to say something else, Jim?
Nope. Go ahead.
Thanks so much for that. We've got a $5 super chat from Florida Man. Thank you again so much for your super chat. It says, here's $5 for the Quagmire reference. Jim's mustache won this debate.
A rat.
Giggity. All right. So,
I must ask you a question. That's what I would say.
Giggity you.
So we have a $2 super chat from Kent Hoven CPA. Thanks so much for your $2 super chat. It says,
I need to do my taxes.
Right. So he says, God's real. He wears a number 15 and is the QB in Kansas City.
Is that shoes or?
I believe he's referring to the quarterback for Kansas City Chiefs.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I got you.
I'm not sure how to pronounce this next person's name. Arn Rorvik sends in, I believe this is Norwegian, 50 Norwegian, I don't remember what they had, francs or, no, they don't have francs. They have, I forget what they are. But anyway, thank you so much for that. Question for SJ. Do you think Jesus is watching you right now?
Yes, I think he's watching all of us right now.
Great. He has this.
Jim.
Great. This person has another.
Pants.
This person had another question. Question for SJ again. Do you think that you are a quote unquote rich man relative to the rest of the world?
Yes, most people in the United States are rich relative to the rest of the world.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. The same person says again. Question for SJ. Do you think Jesus would allow you through his rich man needle eye?
Well, the verse right after that is nothing is impossible with God.
There you go.
Do you mind if I ask you a question?
Sure.
If you were asked to recant your belief, would you? If you were faced with death?
No, I wouldn't.
So if it's possible for you to face death without seeing the risen Jesus yourself, why can't the disciples also do that?
Well, I have actually, in the type of spiritual experiences I've had, I've pretty much seen him. So I don't really want to go into that, but
You sound like Paul did.
He's appeared to me in dreams. He's appeared to me in a vision once, and I've heard his audible voice one time in 2016. So I can't deny him. I would never.
Is it true that he really sounds like Morgan Freeman?
No, it doesn't. He sounded. He actually had a really very reasoned voice. It's funny when people talk about the voice of reason, because that's exactly how I would describe it. It was a male voice, obviously.
Just not what you would expect.
How am I not doomed? Because I have faith. I think that's all I need to do. So. How much testimony does it take to estimate that the laws of physics
I'm
have
going to say 4 gallons.
4 and that's one of the things that, I think that's a really good question. If we're looking at miracles, I think that when you first showed Benny Hinn, I thought that was pretty good that Jim started with Benny Hinn, because I actually look at that kind of stuff and I say, wait a second. Is that, come on. It just, I have a hard time buying that kind of stuff when I see that.
Okay. Do you think that they're lying, or that they're in on it, or what?
No, I think that I just don't really believe what Benny Hinn's doing is spiritually guided. I'm sorry, Benny Hinn fans. But
wouldn't you agree that it would have to be like either liar, Lord, or lunatic?
For Jesus?
No, for the magic jacket.
For the is that what he calls it? Magic jacket?
Well, that's not what he calls it. That's what I call it. I don't know what else to call it. But how else would you explain that?
Well, I hate to call him a liar, but I kind of feel like I don't.
Well, it's not him though; it's the audience.
Let me just say that I'm very skeptical of that. I would have to go there and witness it myself, and I would have to witness it in myself. And if I didn't see myself having some sort of miracle happen at Benny Hinn's place, or somebody I knew closely, like with some sort of disability, who went with me, and then suddenly that disability were cured, in that case, then I would believe it. But I have to have the evidence myself in that particular case, in the Benny Hinn case. Okay. So if people have seen that kind of evidence, maybe
they can't hear you, CC. So I'm going to repeat the question.
They can hear me now. I had to fix the mic. So yeah, cool. That's what I was about to do. I was just going to repeat. The question was from Jared, and it's how much testimony does it take to demonstrate the laws of physics have been violated? But more important news: a bat at my school just
bat
out.
Oh wow!
Like a Louisville?
Don't eat it. That might have been what started the coronavirus, from what I heard.
How is this possible? I look over and I'm like, geez, there's seriously a bat right here.
It's like a rat with wings.
Yeah, it's just spreading its wings. I'm like, geez, let me move over a little bit. Anyway, next question. We have Brother John says, how many years must go by before a generation passes, SJ?
Let's look at this. So the Earth is 4.5 billion years old, and humans appeared, according to different estimates, somewhere around 200,000 years ago. And then we hear written history. So in written history, we've got stuff starting about 10,000 years ago. And then we have this idea of the last 2,000 years. And so I would say that given the fact that the Population Reference Bureau says that 57% of the population of 108 billion people who've walked the planet have walked after the year 2000, I'd say that this is a very short, condensed period of time in which we have the majority of people have now been aware of Jesus. And if we go longer period of time, we'll see how long this can go. But given the 4.5 billion year age of the Earth, I think 2,000 years is pretty small.
All right, thanks so much for that. So thanks for that question from Brother John. Sorry, this bat is trying to take off. Okay, we got a question from D6 that's for 100 CZK, whatever that currency
it's
is.
It's a Czech konuk?
Corona?
Good thing we got Jim here.
It's Czech.
Awesome. So question for SJ. If I go and investigate all major religions, what should be my consistent way to distinguish right one from false?
Well, that's actually a good question, because the first thing is I would look at the cosmological argument for God, and I would realize this idea of everything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. And then if we backtrack a little bit more, we might say the cause must be transcendental to the universe, and it must also be very powerful, personal, and intentional. And that rules out the Eastern religions. And then I would say the experience that we have with Jesus Christ indicates that God is very personal. And so that would rule out Allah. So now I'm all the way wheedled down to Christianity, and there could be some other different faiths that I haven't mentioned that are not as big as those big ones, the bigger faiths of the world. But I would say just that reasoning alone would bring us to Christianity.
Thanks so much for that, SJ. We have a question from What the Faith. It says, Jim, many people have died for their belief in Jesus and his resurrection. How could it not be true when so many people were willing to die for it?
Sorry, one more time?
So many people died for their beliefs in Jesus and his resurrection. How could it not be true when so many people were willing to die for it?
Well, that's just the thing. Just like Gary Habermas said, it's all about your personal level of conviction. Just like the monk who doused himself in gasoline and set himself on fire to protest the Vietnam War. He was at a point to where that is what he believed that he needed to do. And the problem is that there's another little motivation in there, is that Christians were encouraged to become martyrs. Jesus says, "Take up your cross and follow me. Drink of this cup. You will also drink of this cup. This will also happen to you. You'll be dragged away kicking and screaming." And not only that, but for the first few hundred years in the church, it was not seen as suicide for people to line up for the executions, for people to fight to be first place at the execution, because to be martyred in the early church was a one-way ticket to the kingdom of God. And well, if you can do that, if I can get the instant ticket and die now, well, that's great. It's eternal life, because, well, I'm a human, so I have a sin nature, and I'm a bad person. So if I can just wipe that all out and just get it over with and know that I'm going to be good, then why not? And so that really encouraged a lot. And if you read through the passages, most of the apostles did not want to be killed. They flee. Paul flees from prison. Peter flees. They all are running until they're caught, and then at trial, they'll stand firm. But none of them wanted to die. None of them offered themselves up willingly, which is what martyrdom is embracing death for your cause.
All right, Jim, thanks so much for Did you want to add something to that, SJ? Or?
Yeah, I just wanted to add the idea of when you look at Jesus' ministry for 3 years, he was being pursued in many cases. In fact, just before he was crucified, he basically had gone into hiding for a while, and that's told in the first part of the book of John. So he had been in hiding, and he was escaping too a lot of times during this thing because he wanted to continue his ministry. He didn't want it to end at the points where people were trying to get him early on. But then he finally, when it came up to the Passion Week, and when he decided to, everything came out basically when he entered Jerusalem on top of the camel at that point, which was predicted in Daniel 9 specifically. But at that particular point, he came out as the Christ, and the week started and the clock started ticking.
All right, thanks so much.
He didn't come out. He was called out.
Well, he was recognized by the masses in Jerusalem as the Savior.
Well, I would hope so, because everybody knew from his birth who he was. Anna and Simeon at the temple, the shepherds, the three magi, Mary, Joseph. Everybody knew that Jesus was the Son of God. I don't know why everybody forgot.
No. I'm not saying that everybody forgot at all. I'm saying there were definitely some people who were aware of it, including his apostles. I was just mentioning that the full of Jerusalem, people who were maybe just strangers to the cause or whatever it was, when Jesus was going down on the camel, just as predicted in Zechariah 9:9, and fulfilled by Jesus when he went into Jerusalem, at that point, everyone was praising him, not just his mother and Simeon and people like that.
All right, thank you guys so much. So
thought it was fulfilling it.
Well, since we're running short on time, we'll try and go through these next ones as quick as
go
possible.
for it.
So we need to circle back around because Jared, he must have missed the part where we asked his question. So I want to just re-ask that real quick to SJ. How much testimony does it take to demonstrate the laws of physics have been violated? I know you gave a brief answer to that earlier. You want to just kind of restate your
Well, how much is it? I mean, it's basically asking how much testimony do we need to show a miracle? And so my answer to that is basically, a lot of testimony. You need definitely some sources to show a miracle, and we have that with Christianity. We've got more evidence for Christianity than any other faith in the world. We've got more documentation in ancient books and things like that for Christianity than anything else. And
What contemporary evidence do you have?
What's that?
What contemporary evidence do you have? Because I have contemporary evidence for the miracles of Vespasian.
To say it's contemporary is to say that it's people who lived during the time of Jesus. And we do have the people like Matthew and John, and we also have, of course, Paul.
Those are anonymous authors. Paul did live during the time that he didn't know him.
Paul, we estimate it was right around the year 35 or 36 when Paul encountered Jesus on the road to Damascus. So clearly he was around at the time when Jesus was crucified in 33.
How was he persecuting Christians when there wasn't even Christianity yet?
There was Christianity.
No, there was heretical Jews.
They called it the way.
Thanks so much for those for that interchange there. We've got a question from Jesse Campen. Says, SJ and Jim, can you? I'm sorry, that's where he was asking. Could you repeat the questions? We went back and did that. Anamorphic Mind says, question for SJ: why has there never been any new pages to the Bible in over 500 years?
Well, because the canon was closed. And even in the book of Revelation, it basically said, don't add anything at this point. We're done.
All right. Thanks so much for that. Question for SJ. If God knows everything, et cetera, why would he create humans and animals knowing they would kill each other? And if he knows the future, why would he give options?
So basically, I guess you could ask, why is there death on the planet? And I would say that this life is a stepping stone to the next life. And so this is just like a testing ground, basically, to get us to the next world and to shape our spirits.
But even if it does make this a testing ground, it's still a testing ground that God designed. So God designed it that way.
Correct.
All right.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much for that. We have a super chat from Ian YouTubeland. 35 ZAR, whatever that currency is, says, SJ, if God knows everything, why would he create humans and animals knowing they would kill each other if he knows? Okay, so he just super chatted the same question, basically, it looks like. Yep.
I hope
just super chatted the same question. Okay. Well, thanks so much for that. It looks like I think that's our last question. All right. So I just want to wrap up by saying thanks to Dr. S.J. Thomason and to soon to be Dr. Jim Majors, the mustache for short, usually.
Thanks, buddy.
Yeah, and thanks for everybody who sent in their super chats and their questions. And sorry about the technical difficulties and the bad attacks. But on Modern Day Debate, we just want to make sure that everybody feels welcome here, regardless of your background, regardless of what you believe. We want this to be a place that everybody can come to discuss these things without getting, overly emotional and worried about what will happen if they bring out their beliefs here or there. So that, and then another thing I want to remind you guys of, David Wood versus Matt Dillahunty, one that we've been waiting for quite a long time. If you've been in the in this community for a while, this is definitely one that we've been asking, man, when is that going to happen? So that'll be definitely a great battle coming up. So please hit the reminder button on that on the YouTube page for it, and it'll send you a reminder before it goes live. And also, if you haven't already, follow my lead and also other people like Andrew Rodriguez and Nathan Thompson, a few of the others that have become patrons to the channel for Modern Day Debate. And make sure and hit that like button, subscribe, and that lets James know what debates that people really liked. And so even through all the technical difficulties, I still think this was an awesome discussion, and I don't want and that will help James to realize, hey, look, they really like hearing this. So, and one more thing here, we just had a late super chat come in from Jeremy Pace. Says, SJ, because Muslims are willing to die for their beliefs, does that mean Christianity is wrong and Islam is right? Real quick.
Well, I did kind of address that before, but the idea of people being willing to die isn't enough to say. And just like even Jim pointed out with Gary Habermas, because somebody's willing to die doesn't prove what they're willing to die for is true. But the idea of the early apostles actually knew what they were claiming was to be true. To be true.
So thank you, SJ. Thank you. That's all I wanted to hear. Thank you. You win. That's all I wanted to hear.
End on a point of agreement. So that was pretty awesome. Everybody, thanks for showing up, and SJ and Jim, thanks again to you guys especially for being here and spending your time with us. Thanks so much for that, and can't wait to see you guys again.
Thank you.
Man, thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Had a good one, SJ. Everybody go subscribe to me, youtube.com/Jim Majors. Thank you.